Hey, I'm retrogaming Puppet, and this is 31 Days of Spooky Games here on TikTok. Today we're talking about the original Castlevania. Now, Castlevania was created by a guy named Hitoshi Akamatsu, who worked at Konami back in the 80s. Akamatsu didn't stick around for very long in the games industry, but he did create all three of the original Castlevania games. The first game was released on the NES in North America, and of course the Famicom Disk System in Japan. Though there is a rare cartridge version that later came out that includes a very great easy mode for people who think this game is a bit too tough, which, it's just about everybody, yeah? This game, alongside Ninja Gaiden, is considered one of the hardest action platformers on the NES, and with good reason. Simon Belmont, our intrepid hero, has a very defined jump arc. You get knocked back when you take damage, and of course, throwing weapons require ammo in the form of hearts. But in spite of all that, if you're a fan of old Universal or Hammer horror movies, this game is a can't miss for you, and like I said, that rare Famicom cartridge version has an easy mode, which fortunately is included on the Castlevania Collection, which is available for download on just about everything right now. The game was originally called Akumajo Dracula, which translates to Demon Castle or Devil Castle Dracula. But the series has always been more popular in the West, and well, since it's all based on Western movies, that's not really hard to figure out why. Have you played this one? If not, you should check it out. It's a perfect spooky game for spooky season, and if you have, tell me what you think. October 2nd, and we're talking about Castlevania 3, aka Akumajo Densetsu, aka Demon Castle Legend. This is the third game in the Castlevania series. Hitoshi Akamatsu returned to the director's chair on this one, and yeah, it's pretty good. For my money, this is one of, if not the very best action game on the NES, right up there with, well, Ninja Gaiden, Ninja Gaiden 2, Bionic Commando, all that good stuff. It's not quite Contra, but, it's up there. We return once again to the Universal Monster motif, but there's a lot more going on in this one. Branching pathways, 4 playable characters, and of course a rockin' soundtrack. The one you're hearing here is actually from the Japanese version, because it had an extra chip in it, the VRC6. Although the US soundtrack is nothing to sneeze at. This game is probably better known today by being the inspiration for the Netflix cartoon, but on its own it stands really well. I highly recommend this one. It's my favorite game in the series on the platform, and probably my favorite game in the series that is a non-Metroidvania game. 5 stars. Roger Retro Gaming Puppet says check it out. Have you played this one? If so, which version do you prefer? To learn more, check out our full-length YouTube video on it. Roger Retro Gaming Puppet here with another spooky game. We're almost halfway through Castlevania Week, or I guess we're about halfway through Castlevania Week. Anyways, today we're talking about Super Castlevania 4, a terrible title for a game that in Japan was simply known once again as Akumajo Dracula, and is, well, basically a remake of the original Castlevania. Gone are the branching paths and multiple characters of Castlevania 3, which as a kid made me a little disappointed, but I still loved it. This game has a pretty dedicated fan base, but honestly at this point I consider it the least of the 3 16-bit Castlevanias. Still, it's a good game worth checking out. Has 8-way whipping, which is unique to, well, pretty much any other game in the series. It maps the sub-weapons to a separate button, which is super helpful. You can jump onto, but not off of the stairs, and you can swing from your whip like Indiana Jones. Of course, this one has a fantastic soundtrack as usual, and, well, for an early Super NES title having released the same year as the hardware, this one is pretty hard to beat. Sure, there would be other action games that came later for the system like Mega Man X and even Contra 3D Alien Wars, but for a launch year game, this one is, really solid. Have you played this one? Tell me what you think. Hey, today we're talking about Castlevania Bloodlines. This is the first and only Castlevania game on the Genesis. Konami was pretty slow to support the Genesis, and that's basically because they've been loyal to Nintendo for such a long time, But hey, eventually things let up and they went over to the Sega side and made some of the finest games in the catalog. In fact, I would argue that Bloodlines is one of the best games on the Sega Genesis and one of the best traditional Castlevania games. That is, some people call it a Vintage-vania, some people call it a Classic-vania, but, the non-Metroidvania ones. It is, in my opinion, the second best of the 16-bit ones, but we'll talk about that more tomorrow. Talking about Bloodlines, this game has a ton of really cool graphical effects going for it, really shows off the power of the hardware. It has 2 playable characters, one of which uses a spear, which is, pretty different from what you'd come to expect from Castlevania, and it has some globe-trotting locales not completely isolated to Dracula's castle. The villain this time, at least ostensibly, is Count Elizabeth Bartley, or Countess Elizabeth Bartley, who is based loosely on real-life Countess Elizabeth Bathory, who, you can look her up on your own. Anyways, she's trying to resurrect Dracula, and of course the holders of the vampire killer whip, who in this case is John Morris, who is related to Quincy Morris from the Dracula novel and not actually a Belmont, and his friend Eric Lacard, the aforementioned spear holder. This game has a bunch of new features. You can vault if you're Eric, you can swing from pretty much any ceiling if you're John. There are 2 ways to fire off every supplemental item, and also there is a new power-up that lights your weapon on fire and gives you a new secondary weapon that only lasts until you take another hit. As ever, the soundtrack is just filled to the brim with bangers, and while this is a pretty rare game, it is now available on the Castlevania Collection, of course, and as well as the Sega Genesis Mini, so hey, if you haven't checked it out, check it out, and if you have, tell me what you think. Well, we're getting pretty close to closing the book on Castlevania Week, and today we're talking about the final, original 16-bit Castlevania game, which is Akumajo Dracula X, Rondo of Blood, Akumajo Dracula X, Chi no Rondo, Castlevania X, whatever you want to call it. The original Japanese title is Akumajo Dracula X, Chi no Rondo, which means Demon Castle Dracula X, Rondo of Blood, starting the musical subtitles thing for many games to come. But yeah, this one was something of an unknown quantity among Americans for a long time because, well, it was only released in Japan on the PC Engine CD, and it was that way for a very long time. Eventually it did come west as part of the Dracula X Chronicles, which is a 3D remake of the game, but also includes the PC Engine original with a brand new English translation. That has been then pressed onto PC Engine discs by enterprising fans, shall we say. Unfortunately, this one is not on the Castlevania Collection because it's part of a different collection for PS4 that Sony helped fund, so it hasn't left that platform, and yeah, that's a whole different thing. We'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, but point is, this is a classic Vania, a vintage Vania, if you will, and yeah, it's really good. It includes 2 playable characters, Richter Belmont and Maria. The same Maria from Symphony of the Night, which, again, we'll talk about that more tomorrow, but she's quite different than what you would expect, both in terms of how she looks and how she plays. She's a lot of fun, but it's a lot different than Richter. Richter is your standard Belmont, but he has a couple of new moves here. He can do backflips. He also has item crashes, which are similar to the enhanced uses of the items that you saw in Bloodlines, but even more so, usually a screen-clearing attack, something on that order. It's got branching pathways, a lot of really fun stage designs, so there's a handful of different ways you can make your way through the castle, and a lot of stuff to see here. I don't know, it's hard to talk about because it's super good, and if you haven't played it, which honestly is kinda likely, just because it was a pretty rare thing to get a hand on for a long time, and just lesser known than the main games in the series that came to North America, which, again, a little strange because the series is apparently much more successful in North America than in Japan, so it's weird this one didn't come stateside, but also, well, you know, the PC Engine wasn't doing super great here as the TurboGrafx 16 and then the Turbo Duo, so I'm sure that had more than a little to do with the decision. In fact, I don't think Konami released a single game in the US market on that platform, so yeah. Anyways, we've got it now in myriad forms, so if you haven't played it, definitely check it out. It is the best of the 16-bit Castlevanias, and, well, my opinion, and I think most everyone who's played it, do not play the inferior Super NES port, which, I don't know, it's fine on its own, but I haven't really been counting that one the last couple days when I've been talking about 16-bit Castlevanias, and that one is, not good. So I would avoid that in favor of this one. But have you played this one? If so, let me know what you think. Castlevania week rolls on, and hey, things are getting real spooky today with Castlevania Symphony of the Night. That's right, this is the one that changed everything, and it's the only Metroidvania game that I'm actually talking about this week. But you can't not talk about this one. This is the game that reinvigorated Castlevania as a franchise, particularly in the West, which missed out on Rondo of Blood. Prior to this, the last Castlevania game released in the West would have been Oh, the Super Nintendo port of Dracula X, which we don't talk about. This one was, of course, developed by Konami, as with the rest of them, but a guy named Koji Igarashi actually took over development on this one about halfway through. The original director got promoted internally from Konami and moved on to management and asked Igarashi to step in, and that he did. He said this is more inspired by Zelda than Metroid, but the function of it is that it plays a lot more like Metroid than Zelda. And, well, it's not the first Metroidvania in the series, Castlevania II Simon's Quest, and arguably the MSX version of the original Castlevania both had exploratory elements, but this is definitely the one that put it on the map. This, combined with Super Metroid, really galvanized the Metroidvania genre, and, well, without it today, we may not have 8 million indie games you never heard of that are Metroidvanias. This one sees the player step into the shoes of Alucard, who of course is not a Belmont, but you may remember from Castlevania 3. He was one of the playable companion characters, and of course later in the game, once you have beaten it, you can play as Richter. This one's been ported to Sega Saturn, and to the PSP, and eventually to the PS4, and all of those let you also play as Maria, although she is quite different in the PSP version and the PS4 version, which is based on the PSP version, than she is in the Saturn port, which was developed without Igarashi's oversight whatsoever, and is, not really a great game, but there's a longer video that we've made where we talk about that. That PSP and PS4 version also, I should say, while it's a little bit easier to get your hands on now than the original, did change all of the dialogue, and the translation is a little less cheesy, which some people really didn't like. I also technically prefer the cheesy version, the original, but, I'm not really going to complain about it too much because the new one is fine, it's functional, and the gameplay is exactly the same. Speaking of the gameplay, the thing that I really love about this game is that there are so many ways to break it. There are a number of weapons and spells and item combinations that just make this game so easy to walk right through. The Chrysogrim, the Shield Rod, the Fist of Tulkas. It's just a smorgasbord of things that make the game super easy, to the point where now when we fire it up, I like to play it on the luck mode, which is a secret code. You have to beat the game, but once you input the code, your stats are all bottomed out except for luck, which is super high. So you get great drops, and early in the game it's really hard to even just kill a skeleton, but by the end, you're just unbeatable because you've gotten all the best drops in the game pretty easily. So yeah, I'm going to assume most of you have played this one. If you haven't yet, definitely need to. It is a must play, especially if you're a fan of Metroidvania genre. If you're younger and you've come to that genre as indie games now, played stuff like Hollow Knight, this is where it all began. And, well, that's not totally true. It began with Metroid, but, you get what I'm saying. The modern Metroidvania, Super Metroid, and Castlevania Symphony of the Night, you gotta play it. Tell me what you think in the comments. If you want to learn more, check out our full-length video on it over on the, I guess we call it the Play Button app, so that, like TikTok doesn't decide not to post this. Okay, it's the final day of Castlevania Week, and we're talking about 2009's Castlevania Adventure Rebirth, or the Castlevania Adventure Rebirth, Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth. I'm still honestly not totally sure what the proper title is. I believe it is Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth. But I always said the Castlevania Adventure. Yeah. Anyways, Castlevania The Adventure Rebirth, or whatever, is a remake of the Game Boy game The Castlevania Adventure, or Castlevania The Adventure. Anyways, it's, well, if we're talking strictly about, like, going from the quality of the original to the quality of the remake, it may just be the best remake in video game history, because the original is, very much just okay, and the remake is fantastic. Now, if you're not familiar, the Rebirth series was 3 games designed by M2 for Konami, and they're basically new 16-bit style installments of Gradius, Contra, and finally Castlevania. They were all released in 2009, and none of them are currently available to purchase legally, which sucks, frankly. And I really wish that Konami and M2 would put together a Rebirth collection. Put all 3 of the games on a single Switch cart. I would buy that in a hot minute. Anyways, this particular entry is, I think, the best of them, despite the fact that I am Team Contra over Team Castlevania in general. I gotta say, the Castlevania Adventure remake is, it's just too good. It's practically a different game. It's just a wonderful wonderful, whipping good time, and it is also, unfortunately, the final classic Vania, vintage Vania, the last linear 2D Castlevania game, which also sucks. But, you know, if you had to go out on a high note. Now, while I wouldn't put this one as high as Rondo of Blood, I would say that it's at least on a level with Super Castlevania 4. This is a super fun game, and again, it improves unquestionably over the Game Boy original. I would encourage you to check it out, but unfortunately, if you don't own a copy already, you're going to have to resort to piracy. But frankly, if Konami is going to leave us with only piracy as an option, I guess that's what you're going to have to do. Seriously, Konami, what's the deal? Give us a Rebirth collection. 3 Rebirth games, one Switch cartridge, one PS5 disc, one simple download on modern systems. Let us have it, man. So have you played this one? How do you think it stacks up to the original? Let me know in the comments. Okay, so there are 31 days in October, right? That means 4 weeks plus 3 extra days. So in between each themed week this month, I will be talking about some random spooky game. And today, it's Avenging Spirit from Jalico. Avenging Spirit is kind of a weird one because it was an arcade game and then it was a Game Boy game, and that's it, actually. But this one is a lot of fun. You play as an actual spooky ghost. And as a spooky ghost, you can possess anyone. So any enemy can suddenly become a playable character. My personal favorite is the Underpants Vampire, but there are a lot of options out there. Dragons and robots and ninjas and, well, all kinds of stuff. The most powerful is actually your girlfriend who you're trying to rescue. Once you rescue her and possess her, which requires finding secret keys located around all the different levels, then you have the most powerful character and can get the good ending. For a long time, this one went under the radar, but the arcade version actually just recently got a re-release as a digital download on Switch and PS4 and Xbox and all that good stuff. And Retrobit did a rerun of the Game Boy cartridge. I don't honestly know the status of that, if it's something you can still just buy or if it was a limited thing and they're sold out, but you can find ways to play the Game Boy version if you're so inclined. I think there was a 3DS download, but the 3DS shop is basically closed now, or at least you can't put any more money on it if you haven't already put money on it, so that might be useless. But anyways, they're pretty close to identical. The Game Boy version obviously suffers from being in black and white and having a reduced resolution, but it's a pretty good facsimile of the arcade game. But again, that one's on pretty much everything for like $6. So hey, if you've never heard of it, check it out. And if you have heard of it, tell me what you think. If you want to learn more, check out our full-length video over on that red play button app website thing that you all love so much. Hey there, it's Ghosts and Goblins Week, or Makai Mura Week. So we're going to start, of course, with Ghosts and Goblins. The original Ghosts and Goblins was designed by none other than Tokuro Fujiwara, whose name I really feel like more people should know. He designed a whole bunch of great games for Capcom. He was the head of their home division for a number of years, and his final project before leaving the company full-time was the original Resident Evil. He's responsible largely for all of the Mega Man games in some form or fashion, the Disney games, Bionic Commando, and of course Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, etc., which we'll be talking about quite a bit this week. The original game was released in 1985, not very far away from Super Mario Bros., so when you're talking about side-scrolling platformers of the kind of original age, I mean, you got Pac-Land, but Pac-Land is kind of weird, and the ones that really kind of cemented the genre for what it is were Super Mario Bros. And, well, Ghosts and Goblins, for better or worse. Now, this game is infamously hard, but I also think that part of that is because people know it better from its NES port, which, let's be honest, is, well, it's a bit cliche now to say it's a hack job from Micronix, but let's just say that Micronix was, well, you know, I mean, it was one guy, maybe two. We don't really know for sure, but, well, it wasn't a company with a lot of resources. Basically, from what we understand, it was a single university student, or again, possibly a second who helped with music and stuff, as far as I'm aware. So, yeah, that's the one that people seem to know. It's even harder than the arcade original because, well, it's got some bugs and some weird glitches and stuff like that. But if you haven't checked out the arcade version, it's available on a compilation that came out on the PS1 and Saturn, and that one was not technically emulation, it was actually a very, very well done port. The other ways it's available is on the Capcom Classic Collection Volume 1 for the PS2, and of course what you're watching right now above my head is from the Capcom Arcade Stadium on the Switch. which of course it's also available there, the first arcade stadium, not the recent second arcade stadium, because this is one of Capcom's flagship series, and the arcade stadium came out right around the time of Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection, which we will be talking about much later this week. If you're unfamiliar with the game, it's your standard damsel in distress thing. You're the gallant knight Arthur. Princess Prin, and yeah, that's unfortunately her name, has been kidnapped by Satan, and it's your job to go get her back, although Satan isn't the one who's actually holding her. It is Astaroth, a two-faced demon who is actually the final boss. You fight Satan right before the end, but he's the one who actually showed up and kidnapped her, you know. It's tough, but if you love a challenge, I highly recommend checking it out. Also, the cabinet art of the original arcade game, which was distributed in the US by Taito, believe it or not, is really something pretty cool. Now, a big part of that difficulty stems from the fact that Arthur only has 2 hits. One takes off his armor, one takes off his skin. And that sticks with basically the rest of the series, not every single entry, but yeah, it's one for people who like hard, challenging games. So, yeah. So if you haven't checked it out, check it out. Okay, well, we're about a third of the way to Halloween, and today we're talking about Ghouls and Ghosts, aka Dai Makai Mora, which I realized yesterday I never explained what that means. In Japanese, Makai Mora is roughly translated as Demon World Village. So Dai Makai Mora is Big Demon World Village. Yeah, not exactly the best title, and the American title is actually maybe even more confusing, Ghouls and Ghosts, the sequel to Ghosts and Goblins, and, well, it gets worse from here, but we'll get there. Anyways, this is the second game in the series. It was a big hit in arcades, and, well, one of the early games that, alongside Strider and Forgotten Worlds, made the Genesis worth checking out over the NES. Now, Capcom had a deal with Nintendo where they couldn't publish games on other consoles, but Sega themselves licensed the game directly from Capcom and then made their own version. That was the case with all 3 of those games I just mentioned. Ghouls and Ghosts is what we like to call the platonic ideal of a sequel. More of everything in a slicker package. And, well, yeah, it's got more weapons, more stages, more monsters, better graphics, and, of course, a new suit of armor for Sir Arthur, the gold armor, which will now let him cast magic spells, which change depending on the weapon that he's holding. Vitally, this game also adds the ability for Arthur to shoot up and down, which really changes the general game design, which, of course, again was headed up by Takuro Fujiwara, a name you should know. And look, you know, this is our favorite game in the series, particularly the Genesis version, just it's the one that we grew up with, but, you know, every version is pretty good. That includes the Super Graphics version, which is, you know, one of only whatever 6.5 or so games to be released on that platform, and the Master System version here, which is interesting in that it is pretty much a complete redesign of the original game. It changes a whole bunch of things. The stages and the structure is kind of basically the same, but it's quite different. And if you're a fan of the game and you haven't played that particular version, you might find something new to like there. Anyways, this is just one of our favorite games overall, favorite game in the series, a series that we really love, and, you know, just can't say enough great things about this one. If you haven't played Ghouls and Ghosts, I promise, if you're a fan of the genre of side-scrolling action games or just general spooky stuff, you will not regret checking out Ghouls and Ghosts. And if you have, tell me what you think. For more information, check out our video over here on the, Play Button website. Okay, Ghosts and Goblins Week continues with the third entry in the original trilogy, Super Ghouls and Ghosts, which, not a great title. The titling situation here is not wonderful. In fact, I only recently found out that there are a lot of people who either didn't have a Sega Genesis or didn't have a Super Nintendo back in the day that they thought Ghouls and Ghosts and Super Ghouls and Ghosts were just 2 different versions of the same game, which they are not. Super Ghouls and Ghosts is a full-blown sequel to the arcade and Genesis game. And yeah, actually, that's a pretty interesting little piece of trivia here. This is the first game not released in the arcade, but in fact sent directly to a home console, though I'm sure it was in those weird Super NES Play Choice 10 things that came out. Anyways, it didn't have an original arcade cabinet, but it was still designed by Takuro Fujiwara, and, well, I think it's kind of a step down from the previous game. Arthur can no longer shoot up or down, but there are more levels, more complex level designs for sure, bigger bosses, and more weapons, and a new armor along with some new armor systems. So now you go from the steel armor to the bronze armor, which improves your weapons, to the gold armor, which has the improved weapons, and can still cast spells. It also includes a new shield, which can be upgraded separately Arthur can also double jump now, which I think is meant to kind of supplant the shooting up and down thing, but honestly I like shooting up and down more. It would be nice if we could have all of those things. Yeah. But nevertheless, this is a very solid game, one of my favorites on the Super Nintendo, and a first-year release. The only thing that really holds it back from being an all-timer is the fact that the original release has a ton of slowdown, though there are later versions that kind of help with that. There's, of course, the PlayStation and Saturn version, then on the PS2 and Xbox like the last two games, but since it's not an arcade game, it's not in the Arcade Stadium collections that are currently available. However, if you're a Nintendo Switch Online user, it is one of the Super NES games that's included with that service. Interestingly, there was also a Game Boy Advance port, which had the same name here, but a slightly different name in Japan, and, well, that's a worthy port. It is a little bit cropped, which makes it, kind of tough to see some stuff, similar to the Mega Man and Bass GBA port, but it also includes a bunch of extra stages, remixes from other games in the series, and that alone makes it worth playing. Plus it has a save feature, which is really nice, especially compared to the Super Nintendo game that doesn't even have a password system. So yeah, there's a lot of ways to play this one. If you haven't played this one, this is also probably the easiest game in the series, so, if you're one of those people who just really doesn't like hard games all that much, but you do like spooky stuff, so you'd kind of like to be able to check this one out, well, good news. This one is, the easiest. Not an easy game, but the easiest in the series, I think. Have you played this one? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you want to know more, of course, we got a video over on the Play Button website. So it's still Ghosts and Goblins Week, or Ghouls and Ghosts Week, or whatever, and we're talking today about Demon's Crest, the third game in the spin-off series known as Gargoyle's Quest. Gargoyle's Quest on the Game Boy, Gargoyle's Quest 2 on the NES, and Demon's Crest on the Super NES. This is the final entry in that sub-series, but, it's the best one, and honestly, something of a hidden gem on the Super NES. So, we're talking about it. It's one of my favorite games on the Super NES, and frankly, it's kind of like a spooky version of Mega Man X. You play as the Demon Firebrand, who you may recognize as the evil Red Arimer in the mainline Ghouls and Ghosts games, but here he is the hero. Or maybe anti-hero is a better word for it. But as you collect pieces of the titular Demon's Crest, you can change forms. The Earth Demon, the Sky Demon, who can actually fly instead of just float like in the earlier games, that kind of thing. And by the end, you become the Ultimate Demon. And there's a special code to face a special final boss. This one's also kind of a Metroidvania. Like, there's an overworld map and not a continuously linked 2D side-scroller, but you do go back to previous locations, and some of the locations on the map are even linked through the stages. So, yeah, it's not quite a full-blown Metroidvania, but it kinda is. It also looks gorgeous, and the music is fantastic. This is a game that, honestly, I am dying for a follow-up, or even, honestly, like a good remake to this one. I would just love that. I don't think that Capcom is super hot to do that. It was always kind of secondary to the Ghouls and Ghosts series, and, well, that series hasn't exactly proven itself to be a huge moneymaker in recent years, so yeah, I'm not exactly going to hold my breath, but hey, it's a great game, and it's on Switch Online for the Super Nintendo if that's a thing that you want to check out. But have you played it? If so, tell me what you think in the comments. Okay, time to get weird with it. We're talking about Nazo Makai Mura, Arthur to Astaroth Incredible Tunes. Translated roughly as Puzzle Demon World Village, Arthur and Astaroth's Incredible Tunes. Now what, you may be asking, is this? This is a Japanese exclusive release for the PS1 and the Saturn, and it's based on the Incredible Machine games. Yeah, there was an Incredible Machine spin-off called Sid and Al's Incredible Tunes, in which you made Rube Goldberg devices involving a cartoon cat and mouse, and I guess Capcom looked at that and went, hey, that's a perfect fit for Ghouls and Ghosts. So, yeah, that's what this is. It's a puzzle game based on the Incredible Machine, making Rube Goldberg devices with characters from Ghouls and Ghosts, and quite frankly featuring an absolute banger of a soundtrack featuring new covers and remixes of classic songs from the series. This is one that honestly flies under the radar. Both versions are pretty much identical. Unfortunately, it's all in Japanese, obviously, but also, it's a puzzle game, so you can probably muddle your way through. It's a ton of fun if you're into those kind of games, and sadly, I think we're never going to see another release of this one because Disney, of all people, if you can believe that, currently own the rights to the Incredible Machine franchise. So, Capcom's definitely not shy about making deals with other publishers. I mean, we recently got a bunch of the Neo Geo Pocket games they co-developed with SNK or licensed to SNK, and those got re-released. So on the Capcom side, I wouldn't be too worried about it. But on the Disney side, yeah. And also, again, as I said yesterday, like, this series isn't exactly tearing up the charts, so I don't think there's a lot of demand to re-release this one anyways, and since it never left Japan, that makes it an even more niche title, and you get the idea. But it's not a very expensive game if you're looking for a real copy, and, well, if you're not looking for a real copy, I'm sure you can find a way to check it out. So if you're a fan of the series, if you want a good spooky puzzle game to play for this season, then yeah, I definitely recommend checking this one out. It's one that doesn't get a lot of traction, isn't very popular, isn't super well remembered, especially in the West, but it's quirky and it's a really interesting entry into this series and shows just how popular the series was back in the day. I say check it out, and if you have checked it out, tell me what you think in the comments. And of course, as always, check out the video I did over on the Play Button website if you want more information. We're almost done with Ghosts and Goblins Week, and today we're talking about Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins, or Goku Makai Mora. Or really, what we're talking about is Goku Makai Mora Kai. Goku Makai Mora Kai is a re-release that was Japan only of Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins. Now, Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins was a Ghosts and Goblins game that added a bunch of kind of RPG-ish elements. You know, the kind of stuff that people didn't really play Ghosts and Goblins for. Revisiting stages, having to get certain items and take them to certain characters, items that give permanent upgrades, the kind of thing that really kind of fly in the face of Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins, but still, the existence of the original game was pretty cool because Tokuro Fujiwara came back to Capcom after a decade of absence to make a brand new game in a series he created. But, yeah, like I said, a lot of people didn't love it. And unfortunately, the update, Goku Makai Mora Kai, is a Japan-only release. Now, this one includes the entire original game, so if you liked Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins and you want to play it that way, you still can, but it includes the new Kai mode, which basically turns it back into an arcade game. Takes down the health of some of the enemies, makes it so that items are, one-time pickups, the magic is infinite, it does a lot of stuff like that. It's definitely the preferred way for fans of the series in general, I think, to play this game. Some people like Ultimate, but generally the reception was pretty lukewarm, and this is the one that people go for if they're big fans. It adds a lot of cool weapons. Arthur can shoot up and down again. It adds more suits of armor, more shields. It's generally a more complex take on the series, and I rate it pretty low in the main series, but it's still a decent game. I actually need to spend more time with it. We haven't quite finished this one yet, so I think it is time to put in a few more hours on it, but in general, if you like the series, I can tell you this is the version to go for, and it's worth checking out. I don't think it's too expensive on the secondary market. I feel like we paid about $40 for this one a little over a year ago. But, yeah, have you played Goku Makai Mora Kai or Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins? Tell me what you think in the comments. Okay, today we are talking about the latest and maybe the last entry in the Ghosts and Goblins series, Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection. This one was released on Switch last year, and then it came out for, like, everything else not long after. But, yeah, this is a modern take. Tokuro Fujiwara basically came out of retirement to help out with this one once again, and you can feel it. It's a tough game, but it has difficulty options. There are 2 lower difficulty modes that will make it so that Arthur can take a lot more hits, checkpoints are a lot more plentiful, that kind of thing. And yeah, it makes the game feel a lot more friendly to beginners. You can also play on the classic difficulty mode, or sort of a classic-ish difficulty mode if you don't want to go quite that hard, where Arthur still gets multiple hits, but, it's still a pretty tough game. As always, you have to beat the game twice to see the true ending, but this one throws a little bit of a surprise in there. The second time you play through the stages this time, the levels are actually quite different. They are modified, they're harder, they have new enemies and stuff like that. It's a lot of fun. There are multiple suits of armor, once again, including 2 bonus suits of armor, one of which lets you have every weapon in the game at your disposal, and the other of which lets you cast infinite magic. Everybody loves infinite magic. You can shoot up and down again. It's just, I really loved this game. It was one of our favorites from last year. It's a great game if you're into the series. If you're not, well, you probably won't find anything new here. And honestly, we really liked the art style. Some people thought it looked like an old Flash game, but I thought it looked like an animated storybook, which is really the vibe those games have always been going for. So, yeah, I recommend it. Have you played Ghosts and Goblins Resurrection? Tell me what you think in the comments. Okay, it's time for another random day because, there are 4 weeks in the month and 31 days. 4 weeks is 28 days. That leaves me 3 extra days. So, hey, I'm talking about whatever I feel like on those 3 extra days. I mean, I guess I'm technically talking about whatever I like on the other days, but these are not part of a series. So tomorrow we'll be starting with the NES horror movie series, but today I'm talking about a Sega Genesis game, Gynog, or Gynaug, or... yeah, I don't really know. But the important thing here is that it was known as Wings of War here in the US, and also is one of the few examples where the US cover art is way better than the Japanese because it was done by Boris Vallejo. Now, if you know me at all, you know that there are 2 things that I love, shoot-em-ups and spooky stuff. And so when a shoot-em-up has spooky stuff, well, hey, we're in the money. And this game is exactly that. It is basically a horror-themed shoot-em-up. You play as a guy named War, who has wings, and is defending his planet against the evils of the Destroyer. The Destroyer is corrupting everything around him, and look, just check out some of these, animations and monster designs, and yeah. This is from a company called Messiah, and they also did another Genesis shooter called Advanced Buster Hawk Glaylancer, which honestly I think is a better game, but you might know them more from the internet meme known as Cho Aniki, which is the super homoerotic buff dude shoot-em-up series. Those games are good too, but honestly I think that probably Glaylancer is maybe the peak of their shoot-em-up prowess. But never mind that. Wings of War actually predates Choaniki, believe it or not, and is a very solid spooky shoot-em-up. You have a pretty limited power-up selection in terms of basically of 3 different shot types, and then you have 2 power-ups that as you collect them upgrade your spread or your bullet count and the other series that make your shots stronger. So yeah, it's not exactly a complex power-up system, and oh yeah, of course you have feathers that make you move more quickly. And then you have alternate shots. No bombs in this one. You get magic shots, and there are different kinds of magic shots. There's a shield, and there's big fireballs and stuff like that. And those are kind of neat, but they're not really part of the core mechanic of the game. But yeah, it's a fun, spooky good time, and it's also not as hard as a lot of old-school shoot-em-ups. So if you're a fan of shoot-em-ups and spooky stuff, check out Wings of War, aka Gynog. It's on Switch now under the original Japanese name, and without any of the Boris Vallejo art, which sucks, but hey, it's out there from Rada Laika Games, the same company that also brought Glaylancer to the Switch. So hey, if you haven't checked it out, check it out, and if you have, tell me what you think in the comments. Okay, it's horror movie games on the NES week, and we're starting with Jaws, released in 1987. Now, this one was published by LJN, but was actually made in Japan. I believe this one was from Atlas, if I'm not mistaken, and they also worked on the Friday the 13th game. We'll be talking about that later, but yeah, this one is, not as bad as you've heard, but not good. It's very tedious, it's very repetitive. Basically, you go between 2 points in the ocean, and there's these 2 harbors, and in between you collect shells from doing these little kind of static shoot-em-up sections. Occasionally you get a bonus stage that looks like Galaga, and that's it. Jaws appears occasionally. He's way too strong for you to be able to take down in the beginning, but eventually you'll be able to deplete his energy. Then you play a mini-game where you have to stab him with the prow of the boat, which also further proves that even though the label art, the box art, and everything, the title indicates that this is based on the original Jaws, it very clearly isn't. There's no Chief Brody, none of that stuff. This is based on, I think this is the Jaws the Revenge, but it could be Jaws 4. I don't really know. My Jaws chronology isn't that great. I'm pretty sure it's not based on Jaws 3D. Anyways, it's, yeah, I don't know, it's okay. Wish I had something better to tell you, but basically what I want to spend this week doing is highlighting the fact that there were a whole bunch of horror movie games released for the NES, a system that was ostensibly meant for children. It was marketed to children. I mean, we know now that video games are for everybody. Everybody plays video games, but, back in the day, in the 80s, after the Atari crash, kind of the way that Nintendo wormed their way back into the hearts and minds of America was by marketing to children. And video games were considered toys. They were sold in toy stores. They were marketed as toys. They were tracked by toy tracking companies in terms of sales and stuff. And yeah, that was kind of that. And it didn't change for a while. So, hey, toys, horror movies. Nothing really new here. I mean, if you're watching me, you probably are well aware that the 80s were full of horror things being marketed to children, from Freddy Krueger to, well, Jaws. Have you played Jaws? You probably have if you're watching this, and you probably don't like it, but tell me what you think down in the comments. You had to know this one was coming. NES Horror Movie Game Week continues with Friday the 13th, and just like yesterday's game, this one was published by LGN and actually developed by Atlas. Now look, this game gets a bad rap, I'm not going to shy away from that, and probably became most famous on the internet from the Angry Video Game Nerd way back in 2006. Whew, how time has passed. But honestly, it's not that bad. I'm not saying it's great, I'm not saying it's a hidden gem, I'm not saying that it's this wonderful A-tier game on the level of Castlevania, or Ninja Gaiden, or Metal Storm, or any of that stuff. What I am saying is that it's got a little bit of a bad rap. Not completely unearned, the game is very obtuse, but a guide like this one right here is not a bad idea. There are also online guides, of course, but once you realize that you can get some pretty strong weapons pretty early on, and maybe have a little bit of fun trying to find those things without using a guide, then actually the game isn't that hard. And honestly, you can grind zombies to get, well, a pretty powerful, if not the most powerful weapon in the game pretty easily as well. And, well, there are ways to kind of trap Jason into certain patterns, and yeah, overall, I don't know, it's a game that I have a soft spot for, but again, I recognize that it's not good. Not in the traditional sense, at least. But if you give it a chance, it's not that bad. And the eerie music you hear in the cabin, I maintain is one of the finest pieces of atmospheric 8-bit music. This one was released in 1989 in between Friday the 13th Part 7 and Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, and honestly I kind of wish it leaned into 7 a little bit more. The image on the label is actually from The New Blood Part 7, but that movie featured a psychic girl taking on Jason, and I kind of wish that they went with that. Like if you played as Lara Park Lincoln's character from Part 7 and had to do psychic battle with Jason, like that would be pretty rad actually. But again, the game is not as bad as people say, and the best thing that I can tell you is really, if you haven't played it, you've only heard things about it, and you're a fan of horror games, or you're a fan of Friday the 13th, you should just spend a few minutes and check it out. Maybe look at a guide to give you a little bit of a head start, so it's not super obtuse, but yeah, not a bad game. Have you played it? Are you a fan of Friday the 13th in general? If so, what do you think of the game? NES Horror Movie Week continues with Phantom Fighter. Now you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, I don't know of any movie called Phantom Fighter, let alone a horror movie, and, you know, I'm a guy who's into horror movies, or a girl who's into horror movies, or, you know, I don't know, a non-binary person who's into horror movies. Whatever you are, you're probably thinking that, maybe you're thinking that, I don't know, maybe you're not. But what you don't realize is that Phantom Fighter is a release in the grand tradition of taking a Japanese movie licensed game and stripping the movie license completely out of it. In this case, it is the Hong Kong horror comedy Mr. Vampire that was the inspiration here. And yeah, for the US release, nobody knew here, especially kids who were playing NES games, what Mr. Vampire was, so they just stripped the license out of it, changed it to Phantom Fighter, and here we are. Now, this is one from FCI, or Pony Canyon as they're known in Japan. If you recognize that name at all, it's probably because you realize that almost all of their games were pretty bad. And yeah, this one has some interesting mechanics, but mostly it's bad. The fight scenes, in which you have a larger, more detailed sprite than your walking around the town scenes, are weird with the hitboxes. It's kind of hard to score a hit. I don't know, it's okay. It's not the worst thing Pony Canyon or FCI ever put out. That Dishonor would probably go to, like, I think Super Pitfall. But yeah, I don't know. This is one I wanted to highlight, not because the game is particularly good, but because this was a shockingly common practice back in the day. UN Squadron, that's based on an anime. Blazing Lasers on the PC Engine, that's based on a Japanese movie called Gunhead. And one of the weirder NES games, Kabuki Quantum Fighter, was based on a Japanese kids movie as well. And it doesn't end there. There's a handful of wrestling games, which is, you know, one of our other passions here, that were released here that were originally associated with Japanese promotions, and that was stripped out for the US release. Natsume Championship Wrestling, that was an all-Japan game. Hammerlock Wrestling, that was a war game. WAR, Wrestle and Romance, not like a war game, like, you know, like a war game. Anyway, so yeah, Phantom Fighter is one of the examples of this on the NES. It is a horror movie video game, technically, even if it's not an especially good one. Do you remember Phantom Fighter? Have you played it? Do you like it? Am I missing something? Or, do you agree with me? What do you think of Pony Canyon? I don't know, let me know down in the comments. Horror Movies on the NES week continues as we're talking about A Nightmare on Elm Street. Okay, well, hey, this had to come sooner or later. As you can see by my Freddy Krueger bubblegum here, Freddy was marketed very heavily to children in the 1980s. It's super weird. There were dolls and action figures and a whole bunch of that kind of weird stuff. Like, there was an 800 number where you could call and talk to Freddy. He had his own TV show. It was wild. I mean, Freddy Mania was in full effect, as was Jason Mania. We already talked about the Friday the 13th game. This is actually a much better game, if I'm being honest. This one was developed by Rare. It's got an absolutely awesome David Wise soundtrack, and it's the only 4-player action game on the NES. Wild, I know, right? But most of them are sports games. And technically Smash TV uses the 4-player adapter, but it's for 2 players to each use 2 controllers to use more arcade-accurate controls, using 1 D-pad to move and 1 to shoot. So that's not really a 4-player action game, it's a 2-player, 4-controller action game. Which honestly feels weird. I mean, 4-player arcade games were already quite in vogue. The TMNT arcade game, the Simpsons arcade game, stuff like that was coming out or was already out by the time this game was out. And of course, like, the side-scrolling action genre was like the most popular thing on the NES. I mean, there's a million of them. Some good, some bad, some, in the middle, but only one that's 4 players. And you would think they would have taken advantage of that more, especially since they were pushing that peripheral. So much so that they released the sports set, which included an NES satellite, not a 4-score for some reason, but hey, whatever, and a combo cart of Super Spike V-Ball and Nintendo World Cup. So with them pushing that, you would think there would be more than one 4-player game in the bread and butter genre of the system, but no, it's this one. And hey, that's actually kind of neat and makes the game more worth playing than it might otherwise be. On its own, it's a fine game. Like I said, great soundtrack, good atmosphere, graphics are actually very solid. Rare had like a very house style with their generic characters at this point, and the dude in this game looks very much like the unnamed U wrestler in WrestleMania Challenge and some of their other games. But yeah, I don't know, it's a pretty solid game, all things considered, especially for an LJN movie game. But it does have its problems. First and foremost, there's no way to know how much health you have. Like, there's nothing that tells you how many hits you've taken or how many hits you have left. You've got a sleep meter instead, but that doesn't correspond to when you're gonna die. The second big thing is that the maps get reused a lot. Like, you're going into a house collecting Freddy's bones so that they can be consecrated or whatever. It's basically Nightmare Part 3, but you're doing the part of the kids and of John Saxon at the same time. And yeah, the maps are reused a lot. There's like one attic map, and there's one basement map, and there's one main house map. And while there are other places that you go, like the junkyard, it's mostly repeats of those maps. The bosses also leave a little bit to be desired. Well, there's this whole mechanic where if you fall asleep, you can get actual power-ups, and the Angry Video Game Nerd infamously griped about that. Like, you want to stay asleep, and yeah, actually just playing it to capture footage for this TikTok, you do want to stay asleep. I'm pretty sure that that's how the game was designed. Like, I don't have the manual of my copy, but it seems to me like it is intentional. They put objects that wake you up or drive your sleep meter up in your way, so it actually seems like the goal is to go to sleep and get a power-up that lets you shoot or jump higher or whatever that you don't have access to when you're awake, and try to stay asleep. I guess I could be wrong about that, but that seems like it's actually the most fun way to play this game. And if you stay asleep for a while, you get a mini-boss fight with Freddy where he walks around and just slashes at you. That's also the only way to hear the 1-2 Freddy's Coming For You song, so, hey. Anyways, this is probably the best of the games I'm going to be talking about this week, although I got a real banger coming up tomorrow. Have you played this one? I know it's a bit overpriced, but hey, what do you think? Is it worth checking out? Do you want to go through it and defeat Freddy with a full party? Let me know in the comments. Horror movie games on the NES continues with Gremlins 2, The New Batch. Now, Gremlins 2, The New Batch, I guess, is maybe pushing it a little bit to call it a horror movie. The first Gremlins definitely qualifies as a horror movie. The second one is more of a comedy. I don't even know if I'd call it a horror comedy. The first one is definitely a horror comedy. There's some moments in there that are pretty tense. Yeah, it was rated PG, but that was before the PG-13 rating. Anyways, the game follows the movie pretty closely and was released the same year, and in fact was released the same month as A Nightmare on Elm Street, October of 1990. This one was done by Sunsoft, and when we're talking about Sunsoft in movies, you kind of got to talk about Batman. Well, this game isn't as good as Batman, but it's pretty good, and in fact it's kind of weird that it doesn't get brought up more often. I would say that this feels like the ultimate realization of what Sunsoft was kind of driving at with the top-down segments in Blaster Master and then with Fester's Quest, and like this is the third in that kind of loose trilogy. And Blaster Master is different because there are side-scrolling parts too, but you know what I mean, like it's a top-down action game, and yeah, it's better than either of those. I mean, it's not better than all of Blaster Master, but this is better than the top-down segments in Blaster Master. So yeah, you play as the heroic Mogwai Gizmo, and you make your way around the building of the giant evil company, and you take on the evil gremlins, of which there were many in the movie. This is one of those movies where some people think the sequel outdoes the original. I'm kind of split. I think both are pretty fun movies. Only one has a weird segment with Hulk Hogan though, so you know, there's that. But yeah, you play as Gizmo, there's some top-down stuff, you get to do some shopping, you know, as always, you know, the music is great because Sunsoft, they were really fantastic purveyors of NES music. I don't know that I would put this on the level of the classic, like, all-time top-down action games like Shock Troopers on the Neo Geo or anything like that, but, you know, for the NES, it's pretty solid. The jumping is a little wonky, as it can be in top-down games, I don't love that. But overall, yeah, this is actually a pretty fun game, and once again, I'm surprised it doesn't come up more often when people talk about good licensed NES games. What do you think? Have you played Gremlins 2? Let me know down in the comments. Hey, we're almost done with horror movie games on the NES week. Today it is Alien 3, and well, by this point we're talking about being into the Super Nintendo era, so horror movie games on the NES is a little less shocking than when, like, Friday the 13th comes out in, you know, 89, and we're talking about a system that is explicitly being pushed to children versus, you know, by the early 90s, the Genesis is out, the Super NES is out, they're duking it out in the marketplace, and games are slowly starting to mature, look like they're, you know, maybe for bigger kids, teenagers, and even adults in a way that, you know, they had been during the Atari 2600 age, but not since the NES caused the resurgence in the North American market. And yes, of course, I'm talking about from an American perspective. I'm from America, deal with it. Anyways, speaking of being an American, Alien 3 was actually developed by British house Probe, and yeah, Probe has done some pretty great stuff in the past. They were responsible for the Genesis port of Mortal Kombat 1, they were responsible for Die Hard Trilogy on the PlayStation and Saturn, and yeah, overall they've done some pretty solid stuff, but unfortunately it seems like the NES was not exactly their forte, and this is probably the worst version of this game. The Super NES one isn't great, the Genesis one is actually pretty solid though. Maybe the best, or at least the most interesting version, is the Game Boy one, which was done by Bit Studio, if you can believe that, and it's very much a sort of proto-survival horror game. Limited resources, a map that you run around opening new doors and stuff. It's top-down view, not a fully 3D thing like Resident Evil. Obviously, it's the black and white Game Boy. But yeah, this is just a bad action platformer. This feels like bad Metroid. You have a grenade launcher that opens doors like Metroid's missiles, stuff like that, but the biggest problem here is the controls, and sort of the way it plays, but mostly the controls. B jumps, A shoots, which of course is a violation of the cardinal NES rule when it comes to control schemes, but even more than that, the fact that Ripley runs to the edge of the screen and doesn't stay centered makes it really hard because enemies just keep popping out and hitting you. Also, taking a hit is super punitive because, yeah, the whole goal of this game is to rescue all of the prisoners before the chestbursters come out of them, which of course has nothing to do with the movie. In the movie there's only one alien, blah blah blah, but even still, like, if you got to these people before the chestburster came out, it's just going to come out somewhere else, so I don't really see the point here. But anyways, you're on a timer, and when you take a hit, you get knocked down and have to get up, and yeah, that really wastes a bunch of time. Also, this is kind of the era of what people sometimes refer to as, like, the airplane hangar platformer, where, like, these levels are just huge, they don't scroll directly in one direction, you just kind of have to explore them, and while there are certainly a few games like Power Blade on the NES that have that quality and are still good, most games that have that, again, sort of airplane hangar design philosophy are pretty unfun. They feel aimless and meandering, and it's really hard to sort of get around. But, hey, when you fail the time limit, you get to see chestbursters pop out of a bunch of people, so that's kind of neat, especially to see that on the NES. Have you played Alien 3 on the NES? If you have, you probably didn't like it, because most people don't, but have you played a different version of Alien 3? Or, hey, you know what, tell me your favorite Aliens game down in the comments. Okay, here we are at the end of NES Horror Movie Video Games Week, and, yeah, this is Bram Stoker's Dracula on the NES. This is pretty far past the Super NES launch. Obviously, there are versions of this game on the Super NES, the Genesis, the Sega CD. I mean, this thing was all over the place, and the NES version is not great. Once again, Probe was tapped to do this one, although it was published by Sony ImageSoft. And if you know anything about the history of Sony and video games, most things that were released under the Sony ImageSoft label were bad. Yeah. I mean, they weren't the worst publisher in the world, and kind of like LJN, their reputation precedes them and is maybe a little more negative than they deserve, but nevertheless, most of the games are not great, and this one is no exception. I mean, it's fine, I guess. It's a pretty straightforward action platformer. It's a lot more fast-paced than something like Castlevania, but also it feels a lot more wild, and the fact that the camera is locked to Jonathan Harker so that, like, when you jump, the screen moves, like, the whole screen moves, it's like borderline gives me motion sickness, you know? Anyways, yeah, it follows the Francis Ford Coppola movie, Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. That's a mouthful. And, yeah, this is weird for me that this even got a video game, because, like, this much more accurate retelling of the novel Dracula, which is told entirely through, like, letters, newspaper clippings, voice recordings, etc. Like, why are we making this into a video game? I know that Castlevania was a thing, and maybe that was it. It was just like, Dracula, hey, he's popular in video games, we better make a Dracula video game. I mean, this one feels even weirder than the slasher movies, because at least in the slasher movies like Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, you have these kids who are actively trying to stop the slasher. This idea that Dracula should be a video game is just, it's just weird to me. So yeah, I don't know, kind of a weird note to end on, because this was at a time, I mean, think of how few movies get licensed to video games now. That's a big difference, right? I mean, in those days, we were talking about Mary Shelley's Frankenstein and Bram Stoker's Dracula getting video game tie-ins, even though those are movies that are, one, not for children, and two, don't lend themselves well at all to video game adaptations. Although, like I said yesterday, kind of by this time, like, the video games are for kids thing was a little bit out the window. We're about to enter the PlayStation era here, but nevertheless, that was still the mainstream perception in some cases, and also, these are not stories that lend themselves well to this type of video game. Like, the point-and-click adventure games that have been made about this stuff, that feels like a little more on the ball for this kind of story, not a 2D action side-scroller. So, yeah, I don't know. Have you played Bram Stoker's Dracula? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and tomorrow we will be starting Resident Evil Week. Okay, it's the beginning of Resident Evil Week, and we're starting with one of my favorite games of all time. Resident Evil. Yeah, that's the one. The original Resident Evil. As you can see, I've got a long box copy right here, and boy, that's really not the way anybody plays it anymore, huh? If you're downloading this one, the way you're going to be playing it is the director's cut, but there are a lot of changes. The original Resident Evil takes place in a mansion, a spooky old house, playing pretty hard on the classic old dark house trope of, you know, the spooky old mansion. This one is infested with zombies, and it's actually a result of science gone awry. And, well, you play as a member of the Special Tactics and Rescue Service, and your job is to try to specially tactic and rescue your old compatriots who went in first, and you're not going to have a whole lot of luck with that. But then escape yourself, really, is the primary goal, just to survive. Survive the night in the spooky old house, and the guardhouse behind it, and the weird laboratory underneath it. This game is directed by Shinji Mikami, but really a lot of the credit has to go to the man at Capcom in the 80s and 90s, Tokuro Fujiwara, who actually left right around the time this project was completed, but it was a passion project for him. He wanted to see a 3D realization of Sweet Home on the Famicom completed, and Resident Evil was it. Believe it or not, this was the first 3D game Capcom ever did. I know that's completely wild, right? But yeah, this was the first 3D project they did, and they knocked it out of the park. This game is really hard, this original long box version. There's no auto-aim, enemies take more damage, you have less health, pickups are less plentiful, etc., etc., but We played it back in the day, and we managed to get through it and even unlock the infinite launcher, so it's definitely not impossible, but the director's cut versions hew more closely to the original design of the thing, the Japanese version, and that's kind of what you can expect. And honestly, the Black Label director's cut is definitely the way to go if you're playing original PlayStation Resident Evil, or the DS version, Deadly Silence. Boy, that's actually a really fantastic port. It's not really a remake, but it's a very extensive porting job that revamps a whole bunch of things and adds a touch-sensitive version of the game that has a bunch of puzzles that are specific to the DS, as well as some enemy encounters where you use the touchscreen to swing your knife at zombies and stuff, and you can even blow zombie puke back by you blowing into the microphone. It's pretty neat. Anyways, I could go on and on and on about the original Resident Evil. It is a great game. I honestly feel like it's kind of unfairly ignored these days in favor of the remake version because Capcom hasn't made this one as available out there. If you're a fan of the series now and you've never gone back and played the original Resident Evil, find a way to play the Black Label Director's Cut of Resident Evil 1 on the PlayStation. You will not regret it. Have you played it? What's your favorite game in the series? Tell me down in the comments, and I'll be back tomorrow to talk about Resident Evil 2. And of course, if you want to know more, go ahead and check out the video we did last year on the old Play Button app, Play Button website. Yeah, that was the Halloween special for last year. Resident Evil Revisited. Check it out. Resident Evil Week continues with...
Resident Evil 2.
Yeah, that's right. Now, I said yesterday that the original Resident Evil is one of my all-time favorite games, but when I'm talking about all-time favorite games, Resident Evil 2 is in the top 5. It is one of my favorite games of all time. Now, of course, if you ask me tomorrow, the top 5 might shift, but this one never leaves the top 10, and it's only really even challenged by its own remake and Resident Evil 4. Resident Evil 2 is a game that I got the day it came out. I actually remember calling the local Babbages, if you remember that, and they actually just answered and said, "Hello, Babbages, yes, we have Resident Evil 2. The anticipation for this one was just off the charts. I mean, this game is fantastic, and yeah, it's got a long and sordid development history. There's a lot of stuff I can't talk about in a TikTok about this one, but, there's a longer form video over on the Play Button app. Resident Evil 2 was about 60% complete when it was actually completely chucked in the bin and basically started over from scratch. They kept Leon, they kept a lady character who they changed to Claire Redfield to make ties to the original, and they kept the general, city infestation police station thing, but pretty much everything was redone. The map of the police station was redone, Chief Iron's role was totally revamped. Yeah, it turned out to be a much different and better game if you've ever played the pre-release version. It's not great. But yeah, basically this one picks up only a few months after the original mansion incident from the first game, and the T-Virus has reached the city, and yeah, it's no good. It's a bad scene. The thing that really makes this one is the zapping system, something that hasn't ever really been tried again in any of these subsequent games, which is a shame. But basically, there are two characters, and there's an A scenario and a B scenario. The A scenario is, well, basically what happened to that character, and then the B scenario is what happened to that character during the other character's A scenario. So basically, they're interlocking stories, and when you play through the A scenario, you can do things that will affect the B scenario of the other character when you play it. It sounds kind of confusing to say it like that, but the best example is there's a locker in the basement, and it has a side pouch which gives you more storage space, and a submachine gun. You can take one of those things, you can take both of those things, or you can leave both of those things. And whatever you do, when you play through the game again as the other character, they'll find what you left in the locker, or maybe they'll find nothing. And again, that's just the best example of things. You also see different versions of William Birkin, the scientist who injected himself with the G-Virus and is roaming the police station as a twisted monster. Different characters see different stages of his mutation, and of course only in the B scenarios will you see the final stage in that mutation where you fight him on the train. There's also Mr. X, who pursues you tirelessly in the B scenarios, and while he isn't actually pursuing you as a procedural thing like in the remake, it feels like he is until you replay the game and realize he always pops up in the same spots. But it really does feel like he's just pursuing you, following you through the police station, and he could turn up at any time. In fact, he breaks a lot of the rules that were established in the first game and even the first scenarios of this game. I mean, look, again, I could go on and on. All I can say is that, as I like to say, this is the platonic ideal of a sequel. More of everything in a slicker package, and honestly, for traditional Resident Evil style games, the fixed camera and everything, this is far and away the best one. It is a fantastic game. It is a must-play if you have nostalgia for the PlayStation or N64 era. The N64 version is actually really good and totally unique and was developed by what is now Rockstar San Diego before they were owned by Rockstar. Look, just everything about this game, but maybe don't play that Gamecom version back there. That one's pretty rough. Have you played Resident Evil 2? The original, I mean, not the remake. Well, we can talk about that later, I guess. But, yeah, tell me what you think down in the comments. And, yeah, like I said, we did a video here on the old Play Button website. This is a couple years ago, but check it out. It's one of the longer Halloween specials, but we go pretty extensively into the history of Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil Week continues with the Resident Evil Remake. Now, this one was released a mere 6 years after the original Resident Evil, and that's a pretty fast turnaround for a full-blown remake. I mean, that seems a little early, but honestly, if nothing else, it sheds a bright light on the difference in technology between the PS1 and PS2 eras, the N64 and GameCube era, you know, like, I mean, there was basically a sea change in technology between those two eras. It's so much different from what we see now. I mean, you know, you want to talk about that their Shadow of the Colossus remake, ain't it? Or the fact that they're already remaking The Last of Us, and, like, that was a PS3 game, and I really just don't see that making much of a difference. But anyways, this is one of the all-time greatest video game remakes. It might be the all-time greatest video game remake, and as I said the other day, it's kind of replaced the original Resident Evil 1 in the kind of canon of the story, and certainly in the hearts and minds of the people who enjoy these games. And yeah, I don't know, I kind of feel like that's a little bit unfair, but hey, this is a fantastic game. I mean, this is just... I mean, I think I said it all when I talk about it being one of the greatest remakes in video game history. Shinji Mikami came back to direct another version of his original game with the latest and greatest technology of the time, added a whole bunch of stuff. The Lisa Trevor stuff is great. There's some hidden weapons that are great. Actually, if you let Barry die in Jill's campaign, you can get a hidden weapon that is just extremely powerful and can't be found any other way. But, you know, really, you kind of also have to talk about Resident Evil HD when you talk about this, and this is the Wii port of the GameCube original that's sitting next to me and what you're watching footage of up there, but the HD version is kind of the one that everybody goes to. It's playable in widescreen, and it's got some new unlockables, new outfits and character models for Chris and Jill and stuff like that. And it's also, you know, just like eminently available on basically everything at this point. So yeah, if you're going to play this one, check out Resident Evil HD. It's on the Switch, it's on PS4 and 5, Xbox X, and Steam, and, you know, everything. Have you played the 2002 Resident Evil remake? Do you like it more than the original? I think just about everyone does, but hey, let me know down in the comments. Well, hey, we're moving right along with Resident Evil Week, and today it's Resident Evil 4. One of the best games in the series, one of the best games of all time, one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time, and a game that generally is considered to have caused a massive sea change in third-person action games. It's a lot, and I think that if you go back and play it now, it's hard to say if it will have the same effect on you, and I can tell you for sure the upcoming remake won't have the same effect, but if you weren't there back in 2005, I gotta say, the impact felt immediate. And it's not like no one ever put a camera behind someone's shoulder before in an action game, but it's just everything about this one felt right. Some people say it's a little bit too long. I think it's about the perfect length. Maybe some of the later sections go on just a teensy bit longer than they need to, but I like the village, I like the castle, and I don't mind the island all that much. So it's got a colorful cast. Leon is in full action hero mode, spouting cheesy one-liners like Ash from Evil Dead. Personal favorite is Your Right Hand Comes Off, although I know a lot of people love Where's Everybody Going? Bingo. But, you know, it's a game that even if you haven't played it and, you know, you're like a younger gamer, I think you'll still find a lot to like here. Maybe you want to wait for the remake, but honestly, the remake looks like it's fairly faithful, much more so than the Resident Evil 2 or 3 remakes, but of course they're holding their cards close to their vest. We won't actually know for a while yet. In any case, I would say that, you know, this is a game that deserves to be checked out. My personal favorite versions are the Wii version and the version you're seeing now, which is the PC version with the fan-made HD patch. So yes, the game did come out as Resident Evil 4 HD on modern consoles and PCs, but they didn't really do a whole lot. This fan-made mod took a giant step to basically replace every single texture in the game with a high-res texture. And frankly, it looks amazing. It's such a big difference. I wish I kind of had footage to show you the difference, but if you look at footage of actual Resident Evil 4 and then look at footage of this HD mod, you will be very surprised. So yeah, this is one that it's really hard to talk about in the length of a TikTok because, you know, it's one of the most historically important games of the last 20 years. Actually, it's one of the most historically important video games in the history of video games. Like I said at the beginning, it really changed the face of action video games for a lot of years after, and basically we're kind of still feeling the effects of this game. So yeah, in short, it's a masterpiece, and of course there are going to be some people who don't like it, but if you've never played it, I think there's a good chance that you might enjoy it, especially if you've been watching all these TikToks. Feel similarly to the way that I do about, you know, old action games and old action horror games. And yeah, this is pretty much a pure action game. Of course, it did lead us down a dark path to Resident Evil 6 eventually, but we're not going to talk about that, because this game rules. Have you played Resident Evil 4? Which version is your favorite? Let me know down in the comments. Okay, Resident Evil Week continues, and today we are looking at Resident Evil 7 Biohazard, or if you're in Japan, Biohazard Resident Evil 7, or Biohazard 7 Resident Evil, whatever. Point is, this game was a return to form, sharing the international titles between the two versions, and after the critical failure of Resident Evil 6, and maybe also kind of the commercial one, I mean, it sold a whole bunch of copies, but Capcom apparently wanted to sell more because it cost a freaking fortune. They went back to a smaller story, which I always appreciate, and a story that was actually kind of scary and not just like bombastic action, but with zombies. Resident Evil 7 takes place once again in a creepy old house, the Baker Estate, down in Dulvey, Louisiana. Well, mostly. Part of it takes place somewhere else, but the best parts of the game take place in and around the house. You play as a new character called Ethan Winters, and actually, originally, it wasn't actually clear at all if this game was related to the original series. As it turns out, it is. It's a sequel, not a reboot. But really nothing else that happened in the series up to this point seems to make that much of a difference. Yes, there is a main character from earlier in the series who does appear at the end of the game, but the events of the prior games don't have any bearing on what's going on with Ethan, his wife Mia, or the Baker family. This was the first mainline entry to use a first-person perspective, and the other games that have done that all use light guns, so not really the same thing. The only other one is, of course, Resident Evil 8, Resident Evil Village, that is, the most recent one, but it's a perspective that works. I'm glad they didn't get married to it and that the 2 and 3 remakes still used a third-person camera, and there's clearly room for them to kind of play with whatever perspective works better for a specific story, but first person really worked well for 7. It was VR compatible, as you can see here on this box, but I didn't really play it that way. I'm told that it was pretty terrifying, but that was the big thing. This game was scary again. Probably scarier than the series had ever really been to that point, if we're being honest. I mean, yes, as a child, I was afraid during the original Resident Evil. There was some jump scares, there was creepy atmosphere, but this game was actually pretty scary in a way that, honestly, no game in this series had been for me before. But it went back to the tension of real survival horror, scarcity of items, constant questions of when you'd be able to save or be safe. And the Madhouse difficulty really did it for old school people like me, where even your saves are limited resources. All in all, gotta say, I love this game. It restored my faith in the series, which wavered a bit with 5, although I do think 5 is a great co-op game, and was flagging pretty hard after 6. But yeah, this one restored my faith. It is a fantastic game. It's a great horror game, an absolute can't miss. It is one of the best games in the series, which for me means it's one of the best games of all time. You have got to check out Resident Evil 7 if you have any interest in horror video games. Have you played it? Tell me what you think down in the comments. Okay, we are almost done with Resident Evil Week, and we're talking about Resident Evil 2, the remake, aka Resident Evil 2K19. This one was released in 2019, and while I originally played the PS4 version, which what you're seeing up there is actually the recently updated PC version, which includes ray tracing and all that neat stuff, because I got a new video card recently and I wanted to show it off. Anyways, Resident Evil 2, long considered to be one of the best games in the series. I told you earlier this week it's one of my favorite games of all time, probably my favorite PlayStation game, full stop, although Symphony of the Night is also really good, which I talked about earlier this month. Anyways, Resident Evil 2 was a game that people were begging for a remake of after the very successful remake of Resident Evil 1. And it only took, 17 years to get it. But, honestly, it was worth the wait, because this game right here, I don't want to be too crazy, and I don't want to go, too hard on a recency bias, but, it might be the best Resident Evil game ever. I mean, I also like the remake of 3, I also like 8, which I'll be talking about tomorrow, but like, this game is really good. I think that probably, if any game has unseated the original Resident Evil remake from 2002 as the best remake of all time, it's this game, although don't sleep on Double Dragon Advance. This game was sort of proof that the people who were making Resident Evil games were actually going all in on the scares. So after Resident Evil 7, of course, there's a question of like, is this just a one-time thing? Are we going to go back to bombastic action? But no, this game proved that it wasn't just a one-time thing. We were going full in on the spooks. And I'm glad of it too, because actually, rather than just another generic third-person action game, we've got actual genuine horror games going on in the Resident Evil series now. Of course, 8 is a little more action-focused, but if this is the future of the Resident Evil series, I gotta say, it's in good hands. And, you know, this also helps cement the fact that the series is in the best streak that it's ever been in its entire history. I mean, there really is no better run of games in the series than 7, 2 Remake, 3 Remake, and 8. Anyways, I feel like I'm kind of losing the plot here. Basically, Resident Evil 2 is a third-person, over-the-shoulder version of Resident Evil 2, the original, and tells the same story, fleshes out a lot of the characters and stuff, and, yeah, it's just really good. It's really creepy, it's really dark, both literally and thematically. Chief Irons is even worse than he was in the original. Also, guy has a great way of saying locked. I really don't know what else to say. If you haven't played this game and you like horror games at all, you really, really, really need to give it a try. It's probably on sale right now because, you know, it's Halloween time, and actually it's getting a streaming version coming to Switch, but, you know, obviously you'd need an always-on fast internet connection for that to work. Anyways, Resident Evil 2, it's great. Have you played it? If so, let me know what you think down in the comments. Okay, it's the end of Resident Evil week, and today we are talking about the latest and, maybe not greatest, but the latest Resident Evil Village, which just got a DLC update this week. Resident Evil 8 may be the most direct sequel in the entire series. It comes right after 7, stars the same main character, and is a continuation of the same storyline with many of the same characters. So, yeah, that's more than you can say for 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4 for sure. So yeah, it's another first-person game just like 7, and it takes a lot of cues from 4. The general structure of being in Europe and having a series of unique locations with new villains in each one, that's, yeah, it's pretty Resident Evil 4. There's a shopkeeper, there's upgrades to your guns, all that stuff. It really feels like a first-person update to 4, which has made me wonder why they're remaking 4, because they just kind of did remake 4, but they're remaking 4. 8 didn't work for me quite as well as 7 did, but I still liked it a lot. Got 100% of the achievements, did all that stuff, so, you know, it's pretty good. I think, strangely, it tones down the horror elements, but the one area where they cranked up the horror is probably the single scariest section in one of these games. Like, even replaying the game multiple times to get all the achievements, it probably took to the 4th or 5th playthrough where I wasn't just constantly on edge in that particular section. But I don't know, I'm kind of moving out of my area as a retro gaming puppet here to talk about a game that came out last year and has new DLC that just came out this week. So I'm going to keep this one short. Resident Evil 8 is good. It's not as good as 7 in my opinion, but hey, you should check it out if you like horror games. And if you have, let me know what you think down in the comments. Happy Halloween! We made it. 31 TikToks in 31 days. And yeah, yesterday was the end of Resident Evil week, and so today is the third of the 3 random games, and it's Monster Party for the NES. And why is it Monster Party for the NES? Well, because we just posted a brand new full-length video over on the Play Button site about Monster Party for the NES. Monster Party for the NES is developed by Human Entertainment, who you may know from the Fire Pro Wrestling series, and it's published by Bandai long before they were Namco Bandai, or Bandai Namco, when they were 2 separate companies. And the very first third-party games on the NES were published by Bandai. This wasn't one of them. This came out in 1989 when, as we discussed in the video, you could sell basically anything on the NES. This game is sort of infamous because it's super weird and famously contains a section in the first stage where everything is happy and smiling and kind of your generic NES action platformer vibe, and then all of a sudden it gets grim and gross and bloody and melty, like a David Cronenberg movie. David Cronenberg, big influence in the 80s. There's a lot of stuff in Life Force and like Abadox, The Deadly Inner War, which is another shoot 'em up that feels pretty Cronenbergian. This one, a little bit. But mostly it's just full of weird parodies and kind of offbeat references, and also just general weird stuff. The Japanese version, which was never actually released, is full of parodies, straight up. But yeah, you can learn more about it on that full-length video, and yeah, I don't know if I can keep up this daily TikToks thing, but you know, I'll definitely be around. Gained a whole bunch of subscribers this month. There's over 100 of you now, so yeah, be on the lookout. I'll be around. We'll be talking about vintage games, and I'll be trying to do more like stitches of other people's questions about vintage gaming and stuff like that. So hey, look forward to it. Yeah, like I said, there's a video over on the Play Button site. Check it out. Goes into depth about the game, and yeah, have you played it? Tell me what you think down in the comments.